Hi everyone! Let me tell you how my parents met. It's like something straight out of a movie. It all started on a rainy morning. My mum was rushing to her class at college. She had her umbrella in one hand, a pile of books in the other, and she was running late again. She told me she was wearing her favorite blue dress that day, but her shoes were soaked because she ran through every puddle in sight. As she hurried down the hallway, she wasn't looking where she was going, and wham! She bumped right into my dad. Her books went flying everywhere, and the umbrella nearly hit him in the face. Now, here's where it gets funny. My dad, who always tries to be cool, bent down to help her pick up the books and said,
"Wow, this is one way to make an entrance."
He thought it was hilarious. Mom, not so much. She rolled her eyes and muttered, "Maybe next time. Try holding the door open instead of standing in the way." But Dad wasn't discouraged. He handed her the books, smiled, and said,
"Well, how about I make it up to you with a coffee after class?"
Mom was surprised but agreed, thinking, "This guy better be funnier than his jokes." Later, Mom admitted that she wasn't even planning to show up for that coffee date because she thought Dad was just another guy trying too hard. But something about his smile and the way he looked genuinely sorry made her curious enough to give him a chance. And that's how it all began. A rainy morning, a hallway crash, and a terrible joke that somehow worked. Funny, right? So, after the hallway incident, my mom decided to give my dad a chance. She showed up at the cafe he had suggested, but she told me she was ready to bolt if things got too awkward. The coffee was this tiny little place with mismatched chairs and a big chalkboard menu on the wall. Mom always says it smelled like freshly brewed coffee and warm chocolate croissants. She picked a table by the window, and Dad showed up 5 minutes late, looking like he had run a marathon just to get there. He was out of breath and apologized for being late. Mom says she wasn't impressed yet, but then he sat down, smiled nervously, and accidentally knocked over the salt shaker. She said that's when she realized he was just as nervous as she was. Here's the funny part. Dad tried to impress Mom by ordering a fancy latte, but when it arrived, he accidentally spilled it all over the table. The waiter rushed over with napkins, but Mom started laughing so hard she couldn't stop. Dad, instead of panicking, said,
"Well, at least it wasn't hot soup."
That made Mom laugh even more. She told me it was in that moment she realized Dad wasn't afraid to laugh at himself, and it made him seem real. Once the coffee spill was cleaned up, they started talking. Mom told Dad about her dream of becoming a teacher, and Dad talked about how he wanted to travel the world and write stories. They discovered they both loved books, especially adventure novels. Mom said she was surprised by how easy it was to talk to him, like they had been friends forever. When the date ended, Dad walked Mom home. He tried to be smooth by saying,
"So, same time next week?"
And Mom replied, "We'll see if you can keep your coffee in the cup next time." But the way she smiled gave him hope. And that's how their first date went. Messy, funny, and perfectly imperfect. They still laugh about it to this day. And every time we pass that coffee, Dad always says,
"That's where I won her heart, after almost ruining her dress."
Mom always says that Dad's proposal was one of the most memorable and chaotic moments of their lives. It all happened on a sunny Saturday afternoon in their favorite park, where they used to have picnics during college. Dad had been planning this moment for weeks. He picked the park because it was where they had their first proper date. Outside of the coffee, it was also where Mom had once told him, "This is my happy place. He wanted the proposal to be as meaningful as possible. Dad packed a picnic basket full of Mum's favorite foods: sandwiches, fruit salad, and her all-time favorite chocolate chip cookies. He even remembered to bring a blanket, candles, and a little bouquet of wildflowers he picked himself. What Mum didn't know was that the ring was hidden inside one of the sandwiches. Yes, a sandwich! Dad thought it was the perfect way to surprise her. But of course, things didn't go exactly as planned. As they sat on the blanket under a big oak tree, Dad acted completely normal. They talked about random things, classes, their friends, and a book they were both reading. When it was time to eat, Dad handed her the special sandwich, with the ring carefully wrapped inside. Mom took one bite, then stopped. She looked confused and said, "What is this crunchy thing?" Dad panicked and said,
Wait, don't chew.
Mom froze, thinking something was wrong, and immediately started opening the sandwich. When she saw the little box inside, she gasped. At first, she didn't understand what it was. Then Dad quickly got on one knee and said,
Surprise! Will you marry me?
Mom didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or yell at him for almost giving her a heart attack. She ended up doing all three. Tears streamed down her face as she said, "Are you serious?" Dad, still kneeling, nodded nervously and said,
Very serious. Unless you want to say no, then I might be joking.
Mom burst out laughing and said, "Of course I'll marry you. But you're never hiding anything in my food again." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the park, laughing and talking about their future. Mom kept staring at her ring, which Dad said he spent months saving for. To this day, Mom says it was the most unexpected and romantic proposal she could have imagined. And whenever Dad teases her about being dramatic, she fires back, "At least I didn't swallow the ring." That's how their journey to forever officially began. With a sandwich, a lot of laughter, and a big yes. After my parents got married, their journey together really began. Mum always says the early days of their marriage were some of the happiest and hardest times of their lives. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that's what mattered the most. Their first home was a tiny, one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of an old building. The floors creaked with every step. The kitchen was barely big enough for one person, and the faucet in the bathroom leaked constantly. Mom used to joke that their apartment had character. But deep down, they both loved it because it was theirs. Dad says the first thing they bought together was a second-hand couch, and they had to carry it up 3 flights of stairs because the building didn't have an elevator. They spent their first night in that apartment eating pizza on the floor because they didn't have a table yet. In those days, money was tight. Mom worked as a part-time teacher while finishing her degree, and Dad was juggling freelance writing gigs. They learned to stretch every dollar, eating simple meals and finding creative ways to have fun without spending much. Mom told me they would have date nights at home, where they'd cook together and watch movies on an old TV that barely worked. One time, the TV stopped working altogether, so they ended up acting out their favorite scenes from the movie instead. They laughed so hard that night, they completely forgot about the broken TV. Even though times were tough, my parents never stopped dreaming. Every night, they would sit on the floor with a notebook and plan their future. Mom would say, "One day, we'll have a little house with a garden." And Dad would add,
And we'll travel the world, one place at a time.
they didn't know how long it would take or how they'd make it happen. But those conversations gave them hope and kept them going. Mom always says it's the little things that made those early years special, like dancing in the kitchen to their favorite songs, writing notes for each other on sticky pads, and celebrating every small victory, like when Dad landed a big writing gig or Mum passed a tough exam. One story that stands out is when Dad surprised Mum on her birthday by making her favorite chocolate cake from scratch. He burned the first batch, so he had to start over. But Mum said it was the best cake she ever had because of how much effort he put into it. Looking back, Mum and Dad say those days taught them what love really means. It's not about having everything figured out or living a perfect life. It's about building something together, step by step, and finding joy even in the challenges. Mom says, "We didn't have much, but we had love. And that was more than enough." Dad always adds,
And don't forget the pizza.
those early days in their tiny apartment may have been simple, but they laid the foundation for the life they have now. A life filled with love, laughter, and the family they built together. As my parents worked hard to build their life together, they began dreaming about the next big chapter, starting a family. Mom always says that the day they found out they were expecting me was one of the happiest moments of their lives. Mom says she knew something was different when she started craving peanut butter and pickles. She laughed about it with Dad, but then one day she decided to take a test just to be sure. When she saw the positive result, she couldn't believe it. She ran into the living room where Dad was working on one of his stories and blurted out, "We're having a baby." Dad stared at her for a moment, then dropped his pen and said, "Wait, really? Like a real baby?" Mom nodded, and Dad got so excited he accidentally knocked over his coffee. He hugged her so tight she could barely breathe, and they spent the rest of the day talking about what life would be like as parents. The tiny apartment suddenly felt even smaller when they realized they'd need to make room. For a baby, Dad built a crib by hand, even though he had no idea how to use a hammer properly. Mum says it wobbled a little at first, but Dad was so proud of it that they kept it anyway. They painted one corner of the room in soft pastel colors and hung up little stars and clouds on the wall. Mum sewed tiny blankets, and Dad spent hours assembling baby toys, even though they didn't have much. Every little thing they added was filled with love and anticipation. When the day finally came for me to arrive, things didn't go quite as planned. Mom says her water broke in the middle of the night, and Dad panicked so much he put his shoes on the wrong feet. They rushed to the hospital, and after hours of waiting, I was born. Mum says the first time she held me, she cried tears of joy, and Dad couldn't stop staring at me like I was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. The first few months were tough. Mum and Dad were both exhausted, and they joked that I had my days and nights completely backward. Mum says she once fell asleep in the middle of folding laundry, and Dad accidentally put baby powder in his coffee instead of sugar. But even with all the sleepless nights and messy diapers, they said they wouldn't trade it for anything. Every time I smiled or made a little sound, they felt like the luckiest people in the world. Over time, they learned how to work together as a team. Dad would sing silly songs to me while Mum got some rest, and Mum would read me bedtime stories while Dad cooked dinner. They say those moments, messy, chaotic, and filled with love, are what truly made them feel like a family. Starting a family wasn't easy, but my parents say it was the most beautiful adventure they've ever been on. They didn't just create a home. They created a place where love, laughter, and a little bit of chaos could thrive. And that's how I became the newest chapter in their love story. Even though my parents' love story sounds like a fairy tale, it wasn't always easy. Like any couple, Hay faced challenges that tested their relationship. But Mom and Dad always say that those tough times only made their bond stronger. One of their biggest challenges came when Dad lost his job at the small publishing company where he worked. I was just a baby, and money was already tight. Mom says she could see how worried Dad was, even though he tried to hide it.
I'll figure it out.
Dad told Mom one night, but she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Instead of panicking, Mom stepped up. She picked up extra tutoring hours at her school, even though it meant coming home late and being more tired than ever. Meanwhile, Dad started freelancing, writing articles and stories late into the night, while taking care of me during the day. Mom says it wasn't easy, but they never stopped encouraging each other. Whenever one of them felt overwhelmed, it wasn't always easy. We're in this together. Another challenge was finding balance. Dad had big dreams of becoming a published author, and Mom was working hard to build her teaching career. With me in the picture, they had to figure out how to make time for their goals while still being there for each other and for me. Mom says they had to learn the importance of compromise. Dad gave up some of his late night writing sessions to spend more time with us, and Mom made sure to reserve weekends for family, even when her workload was heavy. They also learned to celebrate each other's achievements. When Dad got his first short story published, Mom threw a little party at home with balloons and cupcakes. And when Mom got a promotion at her school, Dad surprised her with flowers and a handwritten note saying,
I'm so proud of you.
Of course, there were arguments too. Mom and Dad are both strong-willed, so they didn't always agree on everything. Sometimes they fought about small things, like whose turn it was to do the dishes, and sometimes about bigger issues, like how to save money or plan for the future. One time, they had a big argument about moving to a new neighborhood for a better school district. Dad wanted to stay in the place they had made home, while Mum was focused on giving me the best opportunities. They didn't talk to each other for an entire day, which Mum says was one of the hardest days ever. But by the end of the night, Dad apologized first.
I don't want to fight,
he said.
Let's figure this out together.
And they did, as they always do. What always brought them back together, Mom says, was their love and shared commitment. We chose each other, she often tells me, and that means we also choose to work through the hard times. Dad agrees.
Love isn't just about the easy moments. It's about sticking together when things get tough.
Through every challenge, my parents say they learned something new about each other and about what it means to be a family. They learned how to communicate better, how to support each other's dreams, and most importantly, how to never lose sight of the love that brought them together in the first place. Those challenges could have pulled them apart, but instead, they brought them closer. Mom says, it's like a tree. The storms might shake the branches, but the roots grow deeper. Their love didn't just survive the challenges. It grew because of them. And that's what makes their story so special.